Good to see you again.
And good to see you too.
Awesome. Thanks for doing this. I'm so excited. Congrats on the new book. It's fantastic. I read a couple chapters and I love how you just bring the person right there. It's so great.
Thanks. I grew up as a runner, so I lived through all of that. I've written so many history books, but I've never written about the history of running and all the revolution that kind of changed how we view fitness. So it was fun to write.
I took a whole bunch of notes and phrases from the book and some great stories. And we'll just let you tell the story and we'll get going. Now, I appreciate you, Martin. Here we go. Martin Dugard, welcome back to Built Not Born.
Nice to be here, Joe.
For those looking to get to know Martin, his backstory, and some of the epic history books he wrote, from the Taking series and the Killing series with Bill O'Reilly, I'll put in the show notes, Built Not Born episode 171. We titled it Martin Dugard, Taking Midway, Epic History, and the Courage That Changed the World. But today, Martin is back to talk about his latest book, launching April 14th of 26. It's called The Long Run, the decade that made marathons cool. Martin, I'll start with this. You're a #1 New York Times best-selling author. You have like a dozen books or so. Why this running book? Why'd you need to write it and why now?
That's a great question. We're in the midst of a huge running boom right now. And really, that wasn't the motivation for it, but that kind of is something that came out of this. But I've written all kinds of history, and I've written about every from Abraham Lincoln to George S. Patton, and it's really been fun. But I grew up as a young runner. I raced in high school and college. After college, I did the marathons and triathlons and adventure races. I've been coaching high school cross country and track now for over 20 years, and I still get out there every day. At some point, it seemed like it would be nice to put my research skills and my writing skills as an historian into a book about running. And when my editor approached me, he said, let's do a book about the running boom. And what I found was, as I researched, it was much more than just a boom. It was this revolution in the way that not just America, but the world viewed fitness. And it changed everything overnight, and it still continues to change things to this day. So to go back to the roots of that and flesh it out and tell those stories is really a lot of fun.
One of the great quotes in the beginning of the book, you say, "This is a story of a revolution." Make the case. What actually changed and what made it a revolution?
Well, the book opens with the 1970 New York Marathon. Had 127 people who started the race, 55 finished, no women finished. And within 6 years, that number had changed to several thousand people. A large percentage of the time were women. Now it's almost 50-50 women. But that's kind of the short encapsulation of what the thing is. But go back a decade earlier, even go back to the 50s, people were encouraged not to work out because if your heart beat too fast, they were afraid that you would use up all your heartbeats too soon and you would die young. And people were encouraged to spend long hours sitting down and talking slowly and not walking, not exercising. And to me, the biggest thing is, Sports Illustrated used to feature pictures of NFL players smoking cigarettes and drinking bourbon as advertisements on the back cover, which is in itself not evil, but it just shows how times have changed, that we have become a nation that fitness is not for eccentrics. Fitness is for everybody who wants to get out there and challenge themselves and live a long, healthy life.
Yeah, it's so fun. Way back, one of my earliest childhood memories, talking about how like they didn't want people to work out and use all their heartbeats. My great grandmother, who was like, I don't know, 85 years old when I was 10 years old, she had a bad heart. And instead of saying get up, walk around, get some exercise, like she wasn't allowed to walk up steps. Like it would probably have been one of the best things for her. Like every time we had to bring her to her house, one of my uncles had to pick her up. She's a little Sicilian grandma, pick her up and walk her up her dozen steps, where probably walking up the steps it would have been the best things for her, giving her some exercise. And she wasn't allowed to do anything strenuous because her heart was bad. And like working out and sweating was not good. It was like bad at the time. Isn't it crazy how it turns around?
Well, you think about it like, Springsteen's going back on tour. The man is 76 years old. And you think about that. Back in the day, really, people literally believed that after you hit middle age,
Yeah.
that was it. Your life was over and you were just supposed to chill and take it easy and really not do anything strenuous. And look at how people are aging better. People are, the quality of life is better as you get older. It's just a different thing. And it really all began with the jogging movement with Bill Bowerman in the 1960s and, focus on fitness, which, I mean, it makes it sound like this book is just this boring book about how to be fit or exercise, but it's really about some really cool people who took some chances and really plugged into the culture to get people up off the couch and doing fun things.
One of the epic people in the history of running, Steve Prefontaine, he never won an Olympic medal. You mentioned him on the cover of the book. I think he finished fourth in the Olympics. And yet, like 50 years later, his face is on t-shirts and his quotes are on gym walls. What about, they call him Pre, what about Pre transcends the sport of running?
It's a whole lot. I'll tell you what, when I was a young runner, 13, 14 years old, Pre was the man. And he was the stereotypical runner to that time, had been kind of these quiet, introverted guys. Jim Ryan, fantastic, ahead of his time. But Jim Ryan, very clean cut, very soft spoken. Pre was the exact opposite. He had a Fu Manchu mustache. He was on the cover of Sports Illustrated several times. He was brash and arrogant and cocky, and he changed the way that people raced and the way that people talked about racing. And he was very in your face. He was the kind of guy that would fight you if, in a bar room probably, because Pre liked his beer. And I make the case kind of in the middle of the book, why Pre is so important to the running boom. And I'll let the reader find that for themselves. But at the time, when running was kind of a sport, it was identified with the loneliness of the long distance runner. And it was kind of thought to be something for people who were a little bit eccentric. He made it cool. He made it really for young guys like me who were too small to be on the football team, but who the only talent was the ability to run long distance. He was my idol. He was the man.
Another person you mentioned who's on the cover of the book, Frank Shorter. He wins an Olympic gold, I think, in 72 on live TV. And then something like in America, you write shifts overnight. What did people see when they watched Shorter run? What made that so impactful?
Again, I remember watching that on television. So that was September 10th, 1972. The Olympics on television weren't what they are now. It was kind of like this neat little thing where you'd show a little bit, you'd show the 100-yard dash, you'd show the 1500 meters. But the 1972 Olympics was the first time that they ever showcased the entire marathon on television. So it was the first time Americans really got to know what the marathon was all about. Your average non-runner, they turn the television on and they're watching this guy run 26 miles, 385 yards alone through the streets of Munich. And when I went back to Munich to do some research on the book and to actually run on some of the roads and trails that he ran during that race, it was an exceptionally beautiful course. And so it was not only the first time people saw someone run a marathon, it was the first time a lot of people saw somebody run off the track. And it was something that a lot of people began saying, I could do that too. It was different with Prefontaine. When Prefontaine ran the 5,000 meters, which is 3.1 miles at that Olympics, people couldn't imagine going as fast as he could. He ran the last mile in just a little over 4 minutes. But when they watched Shorter, they said, well, I can't go as fast as him, but maybe I could run that distance. And that wasn't the start of the running boom, but that was certainly a spark that really got people thinking that they might want to try something as crazy as running, for 3 to 4 hours without stopping.
One thing I love about the book, and I had just a note to mention at the beginning of the interview, what I loved about it is you tie in ancient Greece, JFK, not the airport, the president, JFK, the 72 Olympics, and like sushi dinners with your family. And you tie it all together in the narrative in your short, like punchy sentences that just let the history and like the humanity of the story unfold. And it's so cool. Like one of the stories I never heard before, the first New York City marathon, you write 127 writers. You say what, $1 to enter? And then I think they had maybe one woman, and the woman was a firefighter. And it turns into at the end, we're talking like a $500 million of financial impact in New York City. Like, how does all that happen? It is so crazy. How's it go from one to the other?
That's the narrative arc of the book, is explaining how that takes place. Again, you think about Shorter running that marathon and people watching it on TV. And when they held that first New York City Marathon in 1970, they did laps around Central Park. And nobody, it was the Sunday morning. New Yorkers were out doing their thing. You have these crazy people in gym shorts and shoes, kind of running around the park. But the park is so big, so it wasn't like they thought they were seeing this mass participation event. Nobody knew they were witnessing a marathon. They just saw these crazy people out running. And everybody who did the race that year was from the tri-state area, except one guy was from Massachusetts. Everybody else was local. So people either drove there or took the subway, took a cab. Now what happens is when they hold the New York Marathon, well, let's take the London Marathon, for instance. 1.1 million people applied to run it in 2026. 60,000 people ran the New York City Marathon in 2025. So you take all those people, they're not just coming from the tri-state area anymore. They're coming from all around the world. It's a huge international race now. And because people want to run through the five boroughs, that's people renting hotel rooms, eating in restaurants, going to Broadway shows, to get off their feet before the race, buying merchandise. Marathons have become having a huge impact on not just the sport of running, it transcends that. The marathon economy has fueled this boom in marathons in every major city around the world. It's to the point if your city does not have a marathon, you're really not a big city.
There's the Broad Street Run in Philadelphia, and it starts in North Philadelphia and ends up in the city, like downtown. And it's funny, there's some really bad parts of Philadelphia that the Broad Street goes right through, and it's just everyone's there that day. But then, like on a normal day, you're like, I'm not going this part. It is not a great part of town. But the marathon kind of opens it up and brings everyone in, and it's like the cool place to be that time. I want to go back all the way, just pause for a second, go all the way back to the beginning, right? Like the myth, I think you call this the myth that started it all. All right, I might say the name wrong, but Philippides, am I saying that right?
Sure. You got it.
Ooh, woo, that's a big word from a guy from Philly. All right, so 490 BC, the Battle of Marathon, where the name comes from. A day-long runner, supposedly 25 miles to Athens. He got there, he shouted Nike and dropped dead. Except a couple years later, Herodotus said, who was the historian, never mentioned it in his history. So basically, here's a question. The story was invented 500 years later by someone in Syria down the road. Question, if the origin story may be fiction, right? What does it say about us as a people that maybe the biggest sport in the world was built on like a big, beautiful lie?
I like that. I think it's the ideal. I mean, so Philippides he was an actual person. And we know that he at one point ran to Sparta the week before the Battle of Marathon, which was over 50 miles away. Then he ran back to the battlefield. So in the absence of even carrier pigeons, they didn't have telephones, they didn't have telegrams or anything like that. They had people who literally their job was to carry messages by running. So he was one of those guys. But for some reason, I'll get, the myth evolved to the point that at the end of the Battle of Marathon, he immediately scampered up the mountain to Athens to deliver the news. Again, it was just all a myth. But I think that I like that big, beautiful lie idea because I think sometimes it takes something as transcendent as a myth to get us to believe in something as outrageous as running a marathon. When they first brought the marathon into the 1896 Olympics, it was the first modern marathons. It hadn't been contested as an event in thousands of years, yet everybody immediately clung to it as the very epitome of endurance and what it took to transcend hardship and agony and to endure all the things that we tend to think of as the qualities that we'd all like to carry around within ourselves. Who hasn't at some point really been struggling with something hard in their life, whether it be something at your job or something in your marriage, and you've really had to find a way to endure and push through. And we hold stuff like that to a lofty ideal. And I think that if it takes a myth to get that thing going, it's not a bad thing.
Aesop's fables and all that been around for thousands of years because you learn from them, they inspire, right? Let's fast forward a little bit or a whole bunch up to JFK in the 1960s. So you write in December 1960, President-elect Kennedy, JFK is on the cover of Sports Illustrated. They did an article on him about fat and weak Americans, kids failing basic tests compared to Europe. He used the word vigor a whole bunch of times, what we lacked. then at the same time as he's talking about how we got to get our act together physically, the back cover, you just mentioned this, like a famous football player at the time, Giants linebacker Sam Huff, is chilling in the back with a Marlboro saying, let's go for some full flavored smokes.
Yeah,
So crazy on Sports Illustrated,
I know
right?
Sports Illustrated. And what people, Sports Illustrated, kind of rest in peace. Back in the day, it was the coolest sports publication of
It was
all.
awesome. Yep.
It was awesome. And at that time in the early 1960s, it was almost at the peak of its cool. You know, just it was one of those things that Sports Illustrated, it wasn't Life, it wasn't Time, it wasn't one of those your grandfather's magazine. It was a
Hmm.
hip, cool thing. And they were just about to start the swimsuit edition, which, became iconic. So when Kennedy chose Sports Illustrated to make this bold statement, again, let's go back to the 1950s and people being told, like a grandmother, like, don't walk up steps, sit down, talk slowly. And Kennedy's coming out and saying, hey, the Russians are going to kick our ass unless we get back in shape. And that's what he talked about, that idea of vigor.
Yeah.
We needed to be a more vigorous nation. And he wasn't doing it in a way that was shaming people into like, hey, you're weak or you're a loser. But he was basically pointing out that, okay, we have all these things now that allow us to have more time to work out. We have things like lawnmowers and we have dishwashers. We have all these conveniences that make life easier. But instead of using that time to do something more productive with our lives, and he wasn't just talking about exercise, we we basically put the dishes in the dishwasher, turn the dishwasher on, and go sit in front of the TV. And that's the kind of nation we're becoming. And again, nutrition was not then what it is now. That was a time when canned food and TV dinners and all
Yep.
that stuff was at the epitome. So again, I talked about that term of revolution. It's all these little bits and pieces. It's all these people coming along and saying, hey, we can do better. We can be better. Let's try a little bit harder. Let's endure.
One of your quotes in the book about like actually being healthy as you age. I think it was Jill Jameson, I think aged like almost 60 or 57. The quote from the book, there is a discriminatory mindset out there that after a certain age, you should just sit back in the Barca lounger, I don't know what that is, and just wait for death. It's freaking crazy, right? Like
Yeah,
it's awful. There's a picture, there's a meme on Instagram. They go like 50 and 1980, and there's like Wilford Brimley, the guy, I don't know,
yeah.
he looks like he's 90, right? But he says he's 50. Then they go 50 and they show like, I don't know, like it's like they're showing like they're showing, I forget who they show, but they showed someone at 50 and he looks like he's 35. Like they're working out, eating healthy. It's just so crazy when you have that mindset, how much better you can age, right? It's crazy.
You would think, because you kind of look back a generation before not the boomers, but the greatest generation before that, people used to embrace the hard life, the rugged life. We're a pioneer nation. You didn't
Yep.
get from one side of the country to the other by you weren't magically transported. A lot of those people had to walk all the way from, the middle of the country over to the West Coast. So that's the kind of nation we are. But we lost that after World War II. The fitness level of soldiers trying to get in or drafted in the Korean War and then in the Vietnam War was drastically lower than the fitness level of people who were drafted in World War II. So that's the kind of nation that we had become, and that was an attempt to get it all back and to age better.
You tell a great story about Bobby Kennedy and the leather loafers. Could you tell that story in the book?
Yeah, it's and this is one of those things. I was born in 1961, so I was too young to remember all these things actually happening. But if you talk to people of a certain age, they will tell you that there was just in 1963, for just a very brief period of time, there was this fitness craze in the country where people were spontaneously walking 50 miles. They were just literally, and they weren't hiking 50 miles necessarily. Some people did it on highways, but they wanted to walk 50 miles just because JFK had dared the nation to see if they were fit enough to walk 50 miles. As people took up the cause, again, it's the dead of winter. This all takes place in February 1963. Bobby, because JFK was physically incapable of doing much. He had bad back and all that. So Bobby is the one, the attorney general, who was chosen to walk the 50 miles. So he gets up one morning, he puts on his dress shoes and walks 50 miles with his dog. And he finishes in the dead of night. He goes home and sleeps, gets up in the morning, goes to mass, then goes ice skating with his kids. That was just the mindset. I cannot imagine. And In this day and age, a president, and this is not a political statement, any president, Democrat or Republican, challenging the nation to go out and walk 50 miles, and people en masse saying that's a really good idea. And then members of the president's cabinet also walking 50 miles. It's just kind of a crazy thing.
That is nuts. You just can't think of that in this day and age. How about bring this to Boston in the rain? April 2018, you write biblical rain. Your wife, is it Kelleen? Am I saying that correctly?
Hi, Colleen. Yep.
Yeah, Kelleen and your son are stuck in an Annapolis sushi restaurant on TV. Linden alone on Boylestown, soaked, rain hitting him in the face. You get a little misty. Can you tell that story? You get a little tear in the eye.
Again, you're talking to a guy who grew up as a runner. I know the history of running really well. I've had my running heroes since I was a young guy. And my oldest son graduated from the Naval Academy back in 2012, and we had gone back there for just a weekend because he was going to go see some old friends. And my wife and I just thought we'd go back to the East Coast and just to enjoy Annapolis, which is a great town.
Yep.
This huge storm was just whipping across the East Coast, and we gave up trying to walk up and down the main street in Annapolis. We just ducked into a sushi place just to get out of the rain and get lunch. And I forgot that it was Patriots Day. That's the day they run every April. They run the Boston Marathon. And we're in this place, and they're just showing this lone woman just running alone through the rain, and she's tiny, and the rain is just beating her up. And I knew who it was. I knew it was Linden, and I knew her story as a runner. I knew that she'd had some series of second place finishes, and she was an Olympian, but she'd never won the big races. She'd never won a Boston. And so it was raining outside. It was horrible rain. So we just decided to stay in there and watch the rest of the marathon. And after a little while, like when I watch the Olympics, I get misty over the Michaela Schifrin winning the gold medal in the national anthem playing. When it comes to watching people transcend, rise to a level of excellence that most of us aspire to do, to be the best version of themselves they can be, I get a little emotional because I think that is really the godly version of how we're intended to be. We're supposed to be these people who strive and challenge ourselves and push ourselves every day. I don't think we're meant to be mediocre. So when I see this lone woman running through Boston in a driving rain and not quitting, like a lot of people had quit that day, she did not quit. She kept going. And when she won the race, it was just one of those moments where I thought, I have just witnessed something spectacular. And I'm glad that I stepped in out of the rain and had the chance to spend an hour and a half watching the Boston Marathon in a sushi place.
Sometimes the moments that hit you are the unexpected ones. And who would think, like in the rain, in a sushi restaurant, that something like that is a memory you'll carry with you. You just don't know when those moments are coming. It's amazing as a writer, you can capture that and then share it with thousands and thousands of people. I think that's just the magic of an author like yourself, where the magic is, where people go to the bookstore and buy books like this, because you get to share what other people captured and you write it in a way that just connects with everybody, which is so cool.
When I started to write this book, you never know that that's going to come. You know what I
Yep.
mean? As the story began to unfold, that story fell into it naturally. But when I began writing the book and outlining chapters and stuff, that was not part of the book. It was just as the story, as I kind of learned my way through the parts of the running culture that I didn't know before, in our own national culture, in the boom in a marathon, and the number of people. And also, then it became natural to tell the Des Linden story, but that certainly wasn't something that I originally planned on putting in the book.
I see you coached high school runners for more than 20 years, correct?
I still do.
What's the one thing you see separate the runners who, let's call it, make it from ones that don't? What's like the defining factor? Is there an it factor that you found over 20 years?
It's a lot of things, but I would say the number one key to success is consistency.
It's
The
just,
the people who show up every day, the people who do the work, the people that do the little things, like they value their sleep, they value their nutrition, they value their hydration, their mobility, all that kind of stuff. And I can take somebody who's a very average runner as a freshman, and if they do the work, if they show up every day, by the time they're senior, they're going to be a pretty good runner. And that as a coach that's the reward. I mean, I've had 7 California State Championship teams and individuals, and those championships are nice, but the great part of coaching is see somebody who found their niche as a runner and who valued themselves enough to do the work every day. And then all of a sudden they got fast. And it's a
Mhm.
wonderful to watch.
That's really cool. People ever come up to you that don't know that you're the author, Martin Dugard? Does that ever come up during the
Yeah.
when you're out and about, like in the public?
Yeah, people don't. That's the great thing, being an author is like I'm pretty much anonymous. But I remember there was one time we were having a track workout at the high school, and there was a kind of a youth, like 8-year-old flag football group that was going to use the football field
Yeah.
after our practice. And I couldn't let them into the facility until we were done because I couldn't have people walking all over the track. And this guy started yelling at me. He goes, "Oh yeah, look at you, man, you big man. This is the highlight of your life." And I thought, man, if you only knew.
It's so great. Like on the New York Times best-selling list time and time again. So that's so funny. One other story you could talk about before we get into some fun questions about Waltz. I thought this was pretty epic. Is it the weights in Lebo? Am I saying that right? The final marathon.
What if
In
I,
92, Fred Lebo had when he had brain cancer. Can you tell that story real quick? I just thought that was just so
yeah,
impactful.
Fred Lebow, for people who don't know who he was a Holocaust survivor, came to America, worked in the garment district, but he also became a running fanatic, and he became a head of the New York Roadrunners Club, and he was the man responsible for putting on the marathon every year. So but he never actually ran the marathon. I mean, he ran other marathons, but he never ran New York. And so when he became ill with brain cancer, he said he wanted to run the marathon, just run his own marathon. And Greta Weitz, 9-time champion of the race, two-time Olympian, three-time Olympian, she said she would run it with him. And so it wasn't a dry eye in the house as they ran the course together. And, obviously they didn't run it at, the 5:25 pace that she's used to running. They did a very slow, they just did the marathon. And then he died shortly thereafter. And sadly, she died of cancer about 20 years later as well.
Wow, that's wild. Tying the Holocaust into that. You mentioned at the end, you write very powerfully about your wife's cancer scare, the battle with cancer. You write that as a teenager, you ran to escape trauma, but now you run toward it. Can you describe what changed? How does that mindset shift? That's so powerful.
So my wife was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer about 4 years ago, and it's still ongoing. She's never been in remission. And so the reason I actually delayed this podcast, I delayed it for a day, was just because she had to have a procedure yesterday. So this woman who has run a number of half marathons herself, and she taught aerobics and spin classes, and she's in the fight for her life. But as her husband and as the one who watches her struggle with that, sometimes, I need to get out of the house and get a little headspace for myself. So running used to be, when I was a kid, we had a pretty chaotic household. I would just escape by just going out and leaving it all behind. Go run the trails, and I kind of find myself. But now, when I want to reconnect with who I am and really get myself recharged to help my wife with this fight, going out there and going for a run. Just again, I live near a wilderness area. I go out on the trails and just get my strength back, and it's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing that fitness and running does for you.
Is so powerful. That runner's high is real, isn't it? Like those endorphins, they just kick in and it just you think like the world's falling apart and then like you go for a run or a walk and just the endorphins kick in and not that your problems are gone, but you can like rationalize them and strategize and put tactics towards it and say, all right, you know what? I can do this, right? Like it's just amazing what happens after a run.
If I like to say that the hardest part about any run is putting your shoes on,
Yeah.
because we find so many reasons not to go out and do it. And then there's not even on the crappiest runs in the worst conditions possible, I find that I come back and I feel better. Or, if I'm writing and I'm having a writing problem, how can I make this paragraph work? Or what chapter comes next? I can sit at my desk and pound my head on my desktop and not get the answer. I guarantee you, if I go out for a run within 10 minutes, I've sorted the whole thing out.
Yeah.
It typically happens. I'm not sure how that process works, but it's a wonderful thing.
Do you ever find yourself when you have a breakthrough on a run? Do you always remember it or do you talk into your phone? Like, how do you remember the breakthroughs as they come to
Uh,
you?
it's horrible because
Yeah.
I'm not going to run carrying a notebook or something like that. I never thought about talking into my phone. That's probably a smart thing to do. But no, what I do is I try to remember, because sometimes it disappears just like
It
smoke. And
does.
then
It's crazy.
yeah, sometimes you get back and go, wow, what was I thinking about? But then it's there.
It shows up when you know because the break it comes there, and sometimes my simple brain I'll forget it. Like it's in my head, and I got to just keep repeating the idea because
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
gonna
yeah.
I'm gonna lose as soon as I turn the corner. You have a great line wrapping up the about the running. Go, your days playing football might end with high school or even the NFL, but you write running is forever. How cool is that?
One of the things I love about, being a runner and being around the sport for a long time is that eventually almost everybody has it within them to try a 5K or even train for a marathon. At some point, everybody comes around to running. When you're in high school or junior high PE, running is punishment. It's like, oh, you're late, go run a lap. And so we grow up with that. But after a while, I think some people begin to cherish it and they realize that to be able to say that you ran a marathon or even to say that you went down and did the local turkey trot on Thanksgiving, that's a big deal. And people hold on to that and they love to share that accomplishment with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to transition over to a fun part called Share Your Secrets so our guests can get to know you a little bit more as a person. But first, I'm just a huge fan of your history books as well, the Taking series and the Killing series. One question I forgot to ask you last time that you were on, and I thought you'd be the perfect person to ask. So, my grandfather was in World War II. He was in the infantry over there for 18 months. Actually, it's told legends of having lunch with Patton in the mess hall as they went through Europe for 18 months in the Battle of the Bulge and all that. He told me, like in second grade, he's like, the CIA killed General Patton. And he goes, Patton was killed, Patton was killed. And we all just thought he was crazy until you came out with the book, Killing Patton,
Yeah.
right? You came out with your book, Killing Patton, which I read and loved. So, question. So, 1945, General Patton dies. There's a stolen truck. No one's prosecuted. The accident report's missing. There's maybe a confession in 79. There's no autopsy, all that. From all the research you did, do you think there was a conspiracy that was Patton killed or was that an accident from what you know?
No, I definitely think Patton was killed. I don't think it was the CIA. Well, there was no CIA at that time. It was
Okay.
still this, but I think the Russians did it. The Russians were well known for using vehicles as a form of assassination. And I've been to the hospital room in which Patton died. Actually, it was a former stable that had been converted into a hospital. And if you look at all of the details around the accident, I have no doubt that Patton was murdered because he wanted to keep going. He didn't want to stop when he was being told to pull Third Army back, but he was saying already that, hey, our next enemy is not the Nazis anymore. The next enemy are the Soviets, and we need to push as far east as we can, or they're going to start gobbling up territory. And for some reason, even Truman bought into it. And I think Truman was a much better president than FDR because FDR just loved Stalin for some reason. Anyway, long story short, yeah, I think Patton was killed.
Gotcha. So going back, touching real bit with Truman and FDR. My one son went to Marist University in upstate New York near West Point, and it's like blocks away from FDR's presidential library. And I think I'm more of a fan of Truman than FDR. But like you go there, Truman is not mentioned in that library till the last part of the room in the last three panels. Like you
Yeah.
would have no idea Truman was his vice president, dropped the atomic bomb. Like you could go through the whole thing and he's hardly mentioned. It's so crazy. Like how much disrespect he got. I don't know. I just think he's underrated. Last other question. Conspiracy that fascinated me since childhood, the JFK murders, JFK assassination. You write in your book there was an intelligence officer, maybe Nershenko, was that the name?
Oh, yeah.
Nishenko, maybe you or Bill O'Reilly were going to
Yeah.
meet with him, and basically, here it is. Nishenko, KGB officer defected in January of '64, weeks after the Kennedy assassination, claimed to be Oswald's Soviet handler, CIA imprisoned him for 3 years. FBI believed him. Anyway, he killed himself 6 weeks right before an interview. What's your thoughts on what's the story there?
That was all Bill. When Bill was a young reporter, I think he was in Miami for a bit. And I think that's when he came across that story. That was one of those things where we wrote the whole book and then he just said, oh, we need to make sure we put this in there just
Okay.
because he literally had, firsthand knowledge of all that stuff. So to tell you the truth, that was I didn't even have anything to do with that. That was just basically saying, Bill, this is the story, and we're going to put this in the book.
From your research doing Killing Kennedy, do you think Oswald acted alone or there's a conspiracy? What do you think? All the research you did.
I just think there are too many people who could have done it. It was the CIA, the mob, but just there was, yeah, I think that there's more going on here than we know. And it would be nice if in the release of all these Kennedy files, people would release something that really had some substance to it.
Do you think there's information out there that's just not with it's still being withheld? Do you think that's still possible?
I think if it was the CIA or if it was the mafia or the Russians, I don't think anybody's going to note that in a file someplace, but I think that the people who were investigating it at the time, somebody must have had an opinion or a theory that somehow got placed into a file, and maybe there was some evidence to back it up, and then that file magically disappeared just because it was a very volatile time in the country. When you think about that, the fact that we have a president get shot and then all the stuff disappears, it's a whole other level of conspiracy. It's like the Trump assassination with the ear that magically healed
Hmm.
itself in a couple of
Yeah.
days. Who knows what happened there? That has never been investigated. These crimes at that level have a way of getting obfuscated and just, I don't know, it's just a different level of secrecy.
Creatively. So this book is coming out, the long run's coming out in April, right? April 14th. It drops, available everywhere. Big project. How long did this take you to write from start to finish?
Let's see, 6 months.
6 months. Wow. And then in your creative process, is there like a certain amount of writing you do each day, or some days 10 hours and some days none? Like how does it work?
Get up about 6:30, coffee, Los Angeles Times, New
Yep.
York Times, talk to my wife for a little bit. 8 o'clock or so, I'm in the office, and I'm here till, if I can get 1,000 words, that's a good day. If I can get
Wow.
2,000 words, that's a great day. But what happens on those 2,000 word days, the next day is usually 100 words. So,
Yeah.
but the bottom line is I'm in here every day for about a good 3 or 4 hours. I go work out, and then about 2 o'clock, I go down to the school and coach until about 5, stop and have a beer on the way home, come back and spend the evening with my wife, and then I just rinse and repeat every day.
Wow. It goes back to consistency, right? It's just consistency. My goodness.
You got to do it. And I think the mistake a lot of people who aren't working writers make is that they only write when the mood inspires them.
Yeah.
It's a very blue collar job. And this is my office. It's not big. It's probably 10 by 10. It's no windows. And the only thing I have for fun in here is a turntable. But for the most part, I just sit my butt in the seat and I write.
Do you agree with Hemingway, like the first draft of everything's crap? Is that first 1,000 words nonsense? You just got to get it out before that first magic sentence happens. Does that work for you too at your level? Like I write a blog, right? I write a blog on Substack and maybe there's 200 subscribers. And I'm a billion times less of a writer than you, but like I'll write like 100 words and they're all nonsense. And I got to write to like the 150th word till I get a sentence I think I can use, if that makes any sense.
Totally. No, like when I do my own blog on my website, martindugard.com,
Yeah.
I intentionally do not edit it. I just like vomit on the page. It's like a good exercise for me.
Okay.
But but when I'm writing something like the long run, what I'll usually do is I'll get a chapter and then I'll print the chapter out. I'll read it out loud. I'll mark it up. Then I'll rewrite it. And then I'll do that again. And I'll do that again. And it's to the point, and even when the book is completely done, I'll go back and reread the entire book and make changes. There's always something you can fix. And
Mhm.
then, and beyond that, when the publisher does their edit and then sends me clean pages, what they call it first pass, when you see it in the font, I'll go back through and I'll fix that. A book can always be polished and made better, and your ideas can be more clearly explained. And that's just part of the fun of writing is just, it's more than mental masturbation. It's just a it's just a joy. It's the thing I love most in the world.
Yeah, you got to love it though, right? You got to do it. Yeah. Oh, and then when you complete a project of this much labor and intensity, right? 6 months, then the launch comes in April. When do you decide what your next project is, and how soon do you get to that?
Ideally, I know Stephen King will finish a book and then start on a Friday, let's say, and start a new one on Monday. I'm not that prolific, but I will say there's a process because, especially when you write history and you get to know all the people and you get to know the story, you fall in love with it. I wouldn't call it a relationship, but it's kind of like it's like you've got a mistress, you know what I mean?
Mm.
And you have to break up with that mistress. You have to like sever all ties at some point and move on and find a new mistress and start a new project. And it's not an easy process because, because there's the care at the end of it. I finished the long run, but let's say July last year. And then we did all the editing and the stuff like that all the way through, let's say September. Well, the book that was 6 months before the book comes out. So I'm working on another project, but in the back of my head, I'm thinking about, oh, I'm so excited about the long run. The long run is kind of coming out in April. So you keep thinking about that project. And finally, after the book comes out, maybe a month or two, then you finally say, okay, that was good. We need to move on because we can't keep hanging out with that mistress anymore.
And then your next project, do you have like a vision in your head when that comes out, or is that just wait to see how quick you can get it out of your head on the paper?
Usually, let's put it this way, the long run is the first bit of social history I've done. And that makes it sound kind of dry, but the book's a lot of fun. It's pretty sexy. But at the same time, I like the fact that I get to use a different voice. I get to insert myself into the story in some small
Yeah.
ways or tell stories that matter to me. And in the way that, let's say, Malcolm Gladwell does stuff like that. And I want to do more of that. But at the same time, one of the and this is the really the one selfish thing about the writing that I really enjoy is I like to plan my books around the places I want to travel. You know what I mean? So the long run, I'd always been curious about the Munich Olympics and go into the Olympic Stadium and the athletes' village, where the Israeli massacre took place. And I love to go to London, which is a hotbed of distance running. So that's the fun thing. Like when I was writing about Christopher Columbus, I wanted to go to the Caribbean, so that's why I wrote about Columbus. When I
Yeah.
wrote about Livingston, I wanted to go to Africa. It's one of the perks of being a writer for a living.
In London, how great is that Churchill's War Room? How great is
I've
that
been there.
amazing?
I go there next time I go to London. Go back because they change it all the time.
Do
And
they really?
it's yeah, they do. They redo the exhibits, and man, I get lost in there. I love that place.
It
It's
is
fantastic.
that blew me away. Like we were walking by, was it 10 Downing Street? And we walked like a block or two down the road and Churchill War Room. Like, what is this? And you go inside this bunker and you're like, oh my gosh, history like on triple overload. Like it's so crazy. Oh, it's amazing. It's amazing. How about this? I asked this question to everyone, but I think I know the answer. Martin, you got your family, your coaching, you're writing book after book, New York Times best-selling author. When you need to clear your mind or recharge your body, what do you do? I might know the answer.
Usually, usually I find myself out running somewhere or
Oof.
at the very least walking. But no, the thing is, I carry a book with me wherever I go. If I park my car at the trailhead and I don't really much feel like running or walking that much, I'll just sit down and read. I mean, something about reading, and I don't read. People think that I read like all these really academic books, and I don't. I read cheap spy thrillers just because I like something that's completely different from what I
Mhm.
do, and it reminds me to tell a story in a brisk, present the facts, get the story moving, excite the reader, and it calms me. It really clears my head.
If someone's looking for a good spy novel, who's an author that got your attention?
Ooh, Mark Rainey, you got the Gray Man series.
Really? Okay, not familiar with
Gray
him. I have
Man,
to look that up.
yeah, the
The
Gray Man. You got to start working with Tom Clancy. He's since started this Gray Man series, and it's a great series.
And you mentioned a few moments ago about you like going to the place, you write about places you want to go. You mentioned on the last time you were on that you did a book with James Patterson, and I looked it up. It's the King Tut book, right? The
King
King.
Tut.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
so I read that. It was great. Did you actually go to Cairo for that? Did you go out there for that?
Oh yeah, no, and I do all my research ahead of time. So I went to London, in the British Museum. I talked to their Egyptologist, and sure, her level of knowledge was, obviously so far beyond mine. So she really got irritated with me after a while. It's because I was asking all these really stupid questions. But I went to Cairo and I went to the museum there, and I knew what I was looking at by the time I got there. But the fun part was going to the Valley of the Kings, which is
Wow.
in Luxor, which is which is a ways from Cairo. By the way, I've got one of my favorite pictures is my wife and I riding horses next to the pyramids, which is super cool. But
So cool.
when we went to find Tut's tomb, I knew I had researched the Valley of the Kings, so I knew about all the other tombs, like Ramses and stuff. And so Tut was the last tomb we were going to do, and it's tiny compared to Ramses. Tut is like an apartment, like even the bathroom in an apartment. It's so small. And Tut in Ramses is like a hotel. Anyway, when we finally got to Tut, it was 110 degrees. There were black biting flies all over the place. They had closed for lunch, like the whole Tut exhibit. And so there are all these Italian tourists over beneath this shade canopy, waiting for them to reopen. And my wife was just done with the Valley of the Kings, with the heat and the flies. And she just walked up to the guy guarding the tomb and she gave him $20 and the guy let us in. So
Awesome.
we had Tut all to ourselves for about 10 minutes. And he's still in the tomb. They put him back inside. So
Whoa.
yeah, so it was pretty cool.
That is wild. And that was a great book. That book was a fun read. Like you kind of make up like how he died. And that was great. That was a very creative book.
Oh, thanks.
How about this? I asked this to Guy Kawasaki last time he was on. And here's a new question I'm asking the guests. Martin, what purchase of $100 or less most positively impacted your life?
Oh, my whole life. Huh. That's a good question. I'm a big fan of pencils, but I'm not gonna go buy pencils. I don't, I'll say this. When I was in college and I was trying to find my way, I bought a copy of Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls. What I would do is I would skip I would skip class and go to the beach, and I would sit there on the sand and I would read Hemingway, and then that led me to Hunter S. Thompson and just a number of other writers. But it was that one book sitting there on the sand that made me think to myself, wouldn't it be cool to be a writer for a living? Wouldn't it be
Mhm.
cool to and then I kept saying, no, I could never do that. I could never do that. And then, just that one book led to all these other books, which finally at some point I just I said, screw it, I'm going to try to be a writer. And here we are. What today? We're recording this on February. What? So 2 days from now, February 21st, 1994, is the day I quit the corporate world and became a writer full time. And so we're coming up on with the 32nd anniversary. So yeah, that one book changed everything.
Now, how much do you think Hemingway affected your style? Because Hemingway's known for those short, punchy sentences, and you see that a
Yeah.
lot in your writing.
You know, I'm I used to try to be Hemingway, and then I used to try to be Thompson, and then I used to try to be a lot of other people. But really, the person where I got that idea of trying to say a lot with very few words was a writer named James Salter, and a great writer. Was a former fighter pilot who became a writer. His writing is just so riveting, and so Hemingway had an impact. But if you read Hemingway stuff, it is short and punchy, but I kind of like the idea of, I don't know, it's just a subtle difference between his style and Salter's, but I kind of err on the side of Salter.
A few summers ago, we're out in Sun Valley, Idaho, and I just see a whole bunch of people walking like in this graveyard. So we pulled over, and Hemingway's buried there.
Oh yeah.
Sun Valley, and then the people are dropping, I don't know, whiskey or bourbon or whatever we used to drink.
Yeah.
They're dropping the bottles. There's a whole bunch of like empty bottles like on his grave. It's so crazy.
A long time ago when I did journalism, probably back in the 90s, I had an assignment to do a whitewater rafting story. And so I went to Sun Valley, and the night before the whole expedition was supposed to start, I went to a local place. I had a pizza. I just went for a little hike afterwards to work it off. And I ended up accidentally at that cemetery. It looks like
Okay.
this old Wild West cemetery with a black wrought iron fence.
Yeah, yeah.
I went in to look, and next thing you know, I'm looking down at Hemingway's grave, and it was overwhelming.
Crazy.
And there was nobody there. It was, almost sunset. So I just sat there and looked at this, and it just blew me away. I couldn't believe that I was at Hemingway's grave.
It's pretty wild. That's so cool. So cool. Last question, Martin. We spoke about a lot. Man, we talked about ancient Greece, JFK, the 72 Olympics, sushi in Annapolis with your family. I mean, you coach in high school running. Martin, if you could have everyone listening take just one lesson away from everything we discussed, what would that lesson be?
Live your best life. I mean, it's just, I think not enough people take chances and take risks, and it's not easy, but man, it sure is fun.
No, absolutely. Martin, what I like to do is end with the paragraph you ended the book, and I think this is powerful. This is from The Long Run, coming out April 14th, The Decade That Made Marathons Cool. And I quote, this is Martin Dugard. Kayleen was diagnosed with a rare cancer a few years ago. The side effects of treatment have led to several harrowing near-death experiences. ER, ICU, she fights on. Toughest person I know. As a teenager, I sometimes ran to escape trauma. Now I run toward it, using the miles to clear my head and to be more present as we travel this unexpected journey together. The author is number one New York Times best-selling author Martin Dugard. The book is his latest, called The Long Run, The Decade That Made Marathons Cool. Martin, thank you so much for coming back on Built Not Born. So awesome to speak with you. Love your work. Thank you for making history and just everyday life so interesting. And I appreciate your writing. Appreciate you, man.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, man, thanks for having me on. This has been a really great talk. I really enjoyed it.
Oh,
So,
no, thank you, man. I appreciate your books are must read in my kids' rooms. You're killing and taking series and so good, man. You taught me the history I wish I knew in school. And if I ran into you like 30 years ago, I might have been a history teacher. How cool you made history, dude. So I appreciate you. Good luck with the book. And whenever that next book comes out, can we have you back on?
of course, slam
Uh,
dunk.
I appreciate you, Martin. Hey, good luck. Hey, best of luck with Kayleen and your family. Wish you nothing but continued health and success. And good luck with the book.
That was fun. That was really fun. That was a good hour. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. You're a great host.